How important do you think it is for the American people to acknowledge that the president and his administration lied and deceived the public to take us to this war in Iraq?
I think it's very important, because if you don't hold leaders to a standard of justice that ordinary citizens are held to, what you do is you create a disrespect for the law among ordinary citizens. And what keeps civilization together is respect for the law. And that's what these people do to us. They trash the law and our attitude towards the law and damage civilization itself.
I guess more specifically, what actions would you take to hold all parties responsible for the deception and the lies that took us to war accountable?
As I travel around the country, I'm very frequently asked what I would do about 9/11 and about the possible conspiracy. Well, I don't know if there's been a conspiracy, but I do know this, that it would be very important to have a new commission that would look into the whole issue, and that commission should have subpoena powers, and that commission should mandatorily place everybody who is subpoenaed under oath, and that they should start subpoenaing the President of the United States, George Bush, the Vice President, and everybody else under them. And if they commit perjury, or if there is evidence that's brought forward of criminality, then you would have a case of, even though they're no longer in office, of going after them criminally for what they did when they were in office.
Moving on to Iran, what are your thoughts on the recently released national intelligence estimate on Iran and their nuclear weapons program that they probably will never have? Seems to me you've been right on this issue the entire time. Would you care to comment more on that?
Exactly, and not only that, well, first off, it's people within the intelligence community who are moral, who have knowledge of what the White House is trying to do to go to war. And so by releasing this intelligence estimate, they sort of have drop-kicked the president in his ability to go to war. That doesn't mean that 6 months from now they can't revive this. But at least right now, they've really sabotaged their efforts to pursue the war, and efforts that were sustained by the Congress and the media. So I really applaud that. But the problem is that everybody is sort of buying into the fact that Iran is a problem. Iran is not a problem. Iran has not been to war for 150 years. Iran is not a threat to us. It's not a threat to its neighbors. Iran is a very substantial country. Iran used to be a democracy. If we would leave them alone, they would undoubtedly become a democracy within a generation. And so by our continuing to consider them an axis of evil, we turn around and question them why, for them having influence in their area. This is their neighborhood. They have influence. We're not in their neighborhood. Why should we have influence there? Again, we charge that they're putting in weapons in Iraq and training. We have no evidence for that. The American military has not come up with any evidence to prove that at all. This is all speculation, and of course, who can believe what this White House is telling us in any regard? The other is that they're supporting Hezbollah economically and with weapons, and Hamas. Well, these are two elected governments. They're entitled to support the governments that they feel represent the interest that they have. We support the government that we want, Israel. Why can't they support the people that they want to support? Now, if we want to see a diminution of violence in that area, maybe the Israelis and the Palestinians ought to be able to make peace. And that's the answer, not turning around and trying to demonize and create a war with Iran, a war which would cause a world depression in the minimum and probably a nuclear exchange in the maximum. That's the policy of George Bush and the Democratic Congress that sustained him in that policy.
How foolish do you think this makes all the other candidates look with all this tough talk, with all the tough talk that's going on about Iran, and now we find out that apparently they're not as big as a threat as.
Well, it makes them look real foolish. And then, of course, Obama today in the debate, making a statement of, well, yeah, no, they're bad people because they support Hamas and Hezbollah. What does that make them bad? Does it make us bad because we support Israel? Does this make us bad because we support Taiwan? I mean, this is ridiculous to demonize people because they have natural cleavages with areas of interest and culture that they hold. This is really not a way to deal with the problem. At this debate, they were trying to really demonize China. How ridiculous that is. China is a very significant country with very difficult problems, and they're handling those problems a lot better than we are handling problems in this country.
Moving on to the fair tax. I guess, why? Why a fair tax? I know you're the only Democratic candidate who actually supports fair tax.
Our system of taxation is corrupt. The income tax is designed to benefit the wealthy and to place the burden of support for the government on the average American, and it gives nothing to the poor. That's the system we have today that's sustained by Republicans and Democrats. Now, what I think is we need a system that will turn around and help the poor and take the burden off of the back of ordinary citizens and transfer it to the back of the wealthy. And the way you do that is with a retail sales tax. Because the sales tax would operate in theory exactly the way the income tax works. In theory, the income tax is the more you earn, the more you pay. But that's not the way it works. The more you earn, the less you pay because of the tax code. But now when you got a sales tax, the more you spend, the more you'll pay. But if you have no exceptions, and I would not permit any, then what would happen, it becomes a very progressive system, and you can make it more progressive by giving rebates for the tax that would be paid on the essentials of life. That's what you would have now is a very progressive system, and for the poor, this rebate that they would receive, somewhere between $400 or $500 a month, would be the first time that they would receive money on a normal cash flow basis in all of American history. Because they would be receiving a tax rebate on the taxes they would be paying on the essentials of life if they could afford the essentials of life. Now that's a progressive tax system. And everybody would know what everybody else is paying, and then they would go get their paycheck and there would be no deductions from their paycheck. What it would do, it would change our society from a consuming society to a saving society. And that's the only way we could begin to address the problem of our deficit, our fiscal gap on the order of $50 trillion.
Now, I know you said that you want to do away with the IRS, but I guess one question that comes to mind, wouldn't we still need the IRS to enforce our tax laws, even if we did switch to a fair tax system?
No, it's not hard to enforce a sales tax. Not at all. You know, most states have sales taxes, and so what you do is you'd remit a portion of the tax collected to the state for collecting it, or the local government, or you'd remit a portion of it to the business for collecting it. So it would be self-policing in that regard. And with respect to sending a rebate check, well, the Social Security Department is good at sending out checks, so they could send out those checks. And so you wouldn't need the income, the tax, the IRS. The other big significant thing that we don't appreciate is that the amount of money that it takes for the private sector to comply with our present tax system is on the order of $270 billion a year. That's half of what we've spent in Iraq in the last 4 years. Half. And we spend that every year in the private sector to merely comply with the tax laws that we have.